To brace for the challenges of meeting CMMC compliance, some organizations may seek a managed service provider, or MSP, to help navigate the framework of CMMC 2.0. Providing an analyst point to view on this topic, Mr. Robert Beuerlein, Principal Consultant of Aerospace and Defense at Frost & Sullivan, will present an overview of the MSP landscape and offer contractors some qualities to identify in potential MSPs. Robert has 22 years of management experience in cyber operations and information warfare. He is a retired senior commissioned officer with global experience in training and development systems, information technology, and defense contracting. His significant experience in Department of Defense planning and budgeting processes makes him an authority that contractors can glean a new perspective from. Thank you for joining us today, Robert.
Hi, Julie. Well, thanks so much for having me here. And I'm really excited to be able to speak with you and share some of my experience and some of the work that I've done over here at Frost & Sullivan. And the topic here today is securing the defense industrial base in the cyber domain. What we'll do is we'll go over some background information about Frost and kind of talk a little bit about how we see the world. We'll talk about the complexity and vulnerability of the defense industrial base. Following on with navigating the CMMC framework for the defense industrial base, and we'll kind of unpack some of the policy implications that have precipitated kind of where we're at today and at this juncture. And then we'll take a look at managed service providers, what some of those qualities, traits, and characteristics are that you might look for in a managed service provider. Then we'll go over some case studies, 3 different examples that we'll talk about, and then we'll wrap it up with the conclusion. But if there's one thing that I want the CEOs who might be hearing this today to walk away from, and that is to take a look at the value that they place on their product in relation to the data that they are holding and processing and using and generating in the performance of their duties and their obligations. And I would argue and say that that data itself is more valuable potentially than the product that they're providing, and it's certainly more valuable to an adversary, which is why we're here today. It's the whole reason that we're talking about this today. So let's take a look at what Frost & Sullivan kind of how we see the world. So we have 8 trends that we've identified that inhibit growth across a lot of different businesses. And the thing that I've observed in my short time that I've been with the company is that these inhibitors to growth are not necessarily only for companies that are outside the defense industrial base. They equally apply to the defense industrial base. In fact, there were 3 of them that I think that are really germane to this topic. And that is disruptive technologies, competitive intensity, and then geopolitical chaos. So the DIB is really no different, and they deal with these same factors every day. If we go ahead into this next one, and we can unpack these 3 in a little more detail. So disruptive technology. So when I think of disruptive technology, the first thing that pops into my mind is global entanglement. It's this concept of this idea that everybody is connected to everyone else and everything at the same time, and that entanglement is increasing in density as we move forward. It's just a natural evolution of the modern information technology that we deal with, the pervasiveness of it that we see all around us and every day. And the reason that's important is because for years, our defense industrial base relied on a natural protective barrier that is 2 oceans between us and our potential adversaries overseas. And in the past, if you wanted to damage or do harm to a defense industrial base company, if you wanted to conduct, like, say, corporate espionage, you actually had to go out and develop a human contact, and actually meet that person, like, in person. And then you might be able to, share some tradecraft with them, and then they would begin to exfil data and information and send that back to, wherever that foreign intelligence service might, whatever country that they might be from. And so that barrier has really kind of gone away. And we really see that, I think, over the last, couple of decades or so, in the defense industrial base, which necessitated uh, the NIST standards, the DFAR standards that we've been talking about. Another key factor for disruptive technologies is there's a low barrier to entry for these malign actors to get involved in this. So, information technology is available to everybody, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to set up and shop and start, running things. So there's a low barrier to entry, and opens up the doors also to non-state actors, or non-state actors that could be considered to be like proxy forces or sponsored proxies that carry out these malign activities. And so the DoD, I think, recognizes that they've got to get a handle on securing not just the data that they're holding on to within its unclassified networks and their classified networks, but also the data that the defense industrial base uses and processes in order to carry out their work. And so we've got to get a handle on that in order to remain competitive. And the interesting thing about data is that it provides you with an understanding and making decisions. And so from our perspective, I think that the thing that I like to see or like to look into is how data can expand a range of available options for you to make decisions. So arguably, if you're collecting intelligence and processing data, then you're creating a space for yourself to make a decision within that. And so, if you're in the defense industrial base, for example, and let's say you're involved in port-to-port logistics, and you come under a cyber attack and you have a contract to move, say, a brigade combat team from Fort Hood down to the port, and then you're not able to do that because of whatever reason, that impacts the available decision space that you may have. And it's not necessarily an attack that's targeted against the military. I mean, these are contractors who are providing these services, right? Or a disruptive attack at the port itself that messes up all of the equipment that's there to move cargo on and off ships. And a lot of this stuff is automated. And so, the range of available options we need to try and preserve. And I think that's what CMMC is trying to, plays a role in that. The second piece is geopolitical chaos. And you don't have to take a look around to see kind of where we're at and what's going on. And, that also provides an opportunity for adversaries to do this. So Greg Chung, who worked for NASA as a contractor, he was recruited kind of in an old school way, and he began to exfil data and send it back to the Communist Party in China. And then he was recruited in an old-fashioned kind of old school way. He actually made contact with and then developed a relationship with that. But the important thing to take away from this is that the insider threat that some of this data that's exfilled through is probably the most damaging. And it's not the only way to do things. We have examples recently of the Colonial Pipeline attack, and solar winds come to mind as well. And so these are, examples of geopolitical chaos and impacts that we see. From our perspective, I think also non-state actors and criminal syndicates that can exploit these gaps among traditional states are something that we're dealing with right now every day. And so if you think about malign actors who would lock up your data, put ransomware on your systems and things like that, these are things that the defense industrial base has to deal with. And they're not alone in that as well. And this other thing from our perspective is that industrial states are not industrial states, but revisionist states are not bound by what we consider to be normal rules of engagement. They have they're unrestricted in what's available to them for options. And so, yes, they very much will seek to target you, to target your company, your people, in order to gain a competitive advantage in the operational environment. And that leads me over into the competitive advantage or competitive intensity. The one thing that the cyber domain does do is it crosses across all of the aspects of the defense industrial base, whether it be logistics, whether it be data processing, whether it be professional services, whether it be munitions. I mean, the cyber domain touches everything. And along with the competitive intensity, we've also seen a phenomenon over the last couple of decades. In the 1990s, the defense industrial base had about 50 or 51 primes that actually went out and secured contract work. That number has dropped down to 5. And that has been concerning to Congress, and it's kind of caused them to act on that. And there's still reason to be optimistic. When you look at the large picture, I think that by our calculations, there are over 200,000 companies around the world that are, you could say, are part of the defense industrial base. So it's not all kind of doom and gloom. We used to have 51, now we're down to 5, but there's still a large number of small businesses that are involved in the DIB. And if you take a look at like AFWorks and what's going on with Army Futures Command and some of those other initiatives where they're trying to build collaborative environments, for example, here in San Antonio, the technical port of San Antonio, we're trying to break down those barriers between the Department of Defense and the federal government and some of those businesses and entrepreneurship and innovation so that we can, the DoD can leverage those things. Congress has been concerned and they've acted on this. So what is it about trying to navigate the CMMC framework that I think small businesses, or not just small businesses, but the defense industrial based businesses need to think about? And the small businesses are what kind of jumped out at me. You hear people talking about that, the CMMC framework is going to be a deterrent to businesses and wanting to do business with the federal government or the DoD. And it's interesting that one of the things I noticed is that small businesses file 16.5 times more patents than large corporations. And the DoD, I think, recognizes this. If you take a look at AFWorks and Army Futures Command in San Antonio, the Tech Port, Army Futures Command in Austin, then there's the Tech Port down here in San Antonio. But we see that the Department of Defense is really keen to tap into the innovation that these up-and-coming businesses have. And even at the Tech Port of San Antonio, you see some of the bigs there as well. So there's an acknowledgement of a requirement that arguably, in order for us to remain competitive as a country, we have to tap into this innovation. And that's what we're talking about. We certainly I don't think that CMMC as a framework should be a deterrent to that. But you also see the policy end that comes into this. The military, the DoD, or Congress, told the DoD to create this ASD for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Policy that kind of provides oversight for this. And I think the key tool that they have to ensure compliance with this right now is with the contracting officers. So a recent memo went out from 2 contracting officers from the Office of the Secretary of Defense that provided some guidance to contracting officers in terms of like sticks or things that they could do to ensure that they have compliance within those contracts that they have oversight for. Among some of the things that they could do is they could withhold payment. They could go back to the government and say, no, we're not going to renew this contract when it comes up for renewal. And so provided some kind of like guardrails or frame rails for them to move into in order to ensure compliance. But one of the things that's important to understand is that it's not really in the Department of Defense's best interest to just be so draconian in how they go about this, because, if everybody you went after in terms of compliance, if you just squashed them every time they came around, they would just stop doing business. It wouldn't be worthwhile. It would be counterproductive. So they're trying to strike a balance and how they move those levers of enforcement. So another tool that the government has is qui tam. The translation up here on the slide is, when I sue for myself, I sue for the king as well. Is essentially how that is translated. But really, it's if you think about it in terms of simplicity, it's just whistleblowers. And so, I think we'll have some other people who come in who talk in a little bit more detail, and we'll use one of those examples with Aerojet in terms of like how a whistleblower can help achieve compliance for that, for navigating the CMMC framework. And the last thing I think that we want to talk about when we're talking about navigating the framework, it has to do with the information itself and what actually constitutes controlled unclassified information. I think there are 125 different categories of controlled unclassified information, and the rules that govern that are complex. I mean, each contract that you have would cover that, right? And that the agency that you're dealing with in terms of that contract might be a little bit different in how they go about carrying out that responsibility. So again, this kind of gets back to the policy realm of that. So the policy in terms of like what constitutes controlled unclassified information and data and how it's handled, and the policy associated with that is really a critical thing to understand when we're talking about compliance. The key takeaway here revolves around, I think, keeping pace and understanding what those potential changes and requirements would be. As an example, a company might be dealing with data or generating data and the performance of their work. And today that data might seem innocuous. It would be unclassified. It might be sitting someplace on a server somewhere, or on somebody's desktop or something like that. But this is the information age, and things change quickly. Cyber policy changes really quickly, and data and information policy associated with that changes really quickly as well. And so today you might be dealing with something that seems innocuous. You can move forward in a relatively quick period of time and say, wow, that data is really not just innocuous, it's really important and needs to be protected, right? And so then, the policy that goes along with identifying what that is and how to classify it and how to handle it is really kind of one of the, I don't want to say pitfall, but I guess you really could say it's like a pitfall for dealing with this stuff. And so the key takeaway here is that it's important to stay abreast of developments and potential changes within controlling unclassified information and how it's categorized, processed, and handled. And the rules and things that go along with that are something you've got to keep abreast of. So, what does this mean for the service providers? What I'm looking for in a managed service provider that would be like key characteristics that I would consider if I were a CEO of a defense industrial based company that I would be looking for. What are the advantages of that? I think the biggest advantage for me is I need certainty. I need to know that what I'm forecasting is going to be the same, and I'm looking for repeatability and redundancy, and I'm looking for certainty. And so like firm fixed pricing, so you can take a managed service provider for your CMMC requirements and come in and take a look at your organization, your activities, your structures, and come back to you and say, this is what it's going to cost you. It's firm, it's fixed. This is how much it's going to cost you. And so there's a real advantage to that, so that when I'm going to put in a bid on a contract, I'll know what that is, and I can calculate that into my bid or my offer. In fact, the DoD says that you should do this. You should already be doing this. And so it shouldn't be new. And if you haven't been doing it, well, you need to get yourself straight. Another thing with a managed service provider is there's a rapid ability to scale the level of work. So as you go out and you gain new contracts, or maybe you have to bring in a sub to do that, you can scale this out, you can grow it or shrink it down relatively quickly. It's not rigid. Another thing that the managed service provider is going to be able to do is that while you're focusing on the business end of your work, and the product that you're providing or the service that you're providing, that managed service provider is staying abreast of the policy, right? The developments and where this thing is going. And that, I think, is the most important thing. It frees you up to focus on what's important as a core aspect of your business, and then keeps you abreast of what you need to do to remain compliant and how that goes. And the way that a managed service provider does that is that they're going to go out and they're going to play an active role in like a community of interest. So just like right now, we're at CMCC Con, right? CMMC Con, we're here doing this. We're collaborating with each other. We're building relationships. We're understanding what our roles are, and we're exchanging ideas and, making ourselves better as a community of interest. And that's really, I think, the key thing to take away from a managed service provider. Another aspect that a service provider is going to give you is, I think there's like a halo effect. So you may have to maintain compliance in terms of like training, how you manage your data, how you run your scans, and all your cybersecurity work and activity that might be going on in the background. But arguably, I think there's a halo effect for the organization itself that kind of expands out around and encompasses other areas of work if you were to do work outside of the federal workspace or the DoD. And so there's like a halo effect. So it's kind of like if you bring in Josh Allen as your quarterback, right? And then the next thing you know, everybody around you kind of ups their game, and that makes the organization itself better and more effective. So those are some of the things that I think that you would look for in a managed service provider, and some of the characteristics that I would look for probably that would be defined as being among the better operators in that space. So let's take a look at some of the case studies that revolve around compliance. And the first one, I think that probably most everybody's going to be familiar with is Aerojet. Just last July, the Justice Department announced a $9 million settlement with that they got from Aerojet. And so when you think about he who sues on behalf of the king sues for himself as well, the Latin translation is the whistleblower who blew the whistle on that. Essentially, he gets a piece of that settlement. So after the lawyers get paid and everybody else comes, he gets a slice of that as well. And so for compliance, I think this is a really important thing not to underestimate. So the settlement actually dates back to a filing that was done, I think, in 2015. So it's now 2022. And so 15, 16, that's 7 years this has been dragging out. Aerojet came out and they said, okay, their first thing that they said was that, well, we reported we told you that we were having trouble with compliance. And the court said, no, it's not just enough to say you've told us about some things. You have to tell us about everything, because that's what's written into the standard that we're upholding. So if you're screwing up in a couple of areas and screwing up in some other ones, you can't just tell us that you're screwing up in a couple of other ones and not be there. The second thing that I think is important with this is that Aerojet came back and they said, well, but we still delivered on our product. We still met the contractual end of our obligations with that. And the court said no. And this is where I'm talking to the CEOs and these companies in the defense industrial base in terms of the data and how they handle their data and what they do for compliance, that the data itself, the information itself, is just as important to your business as the product that you provide. And in fact, arguably in this case, the government said, no, actually the data and the compliance and handling that, it is really important. The government didn't sue them because they couldn't deliver on propulsion systems. The government sued them because they weren't compliant with their cybersecurity requirements. And so again, I can't oversize enough that, look at what you're doing, and the data that you're processing, holding, and producing it is just as important as the product that you. So the court disagreed with their claims, and so when it came time to go to trial, Aerojet, they folded. They said, no, we're just going to have to settle because that's the best option that they have. And compliance recovers a number of companies that are in the DIB. One of the important things that I found interesting was that Veritas Technology, along with lots of other information technology companies, you would think, oh, they're IT companies, they should be good with cybersecurity. Why would they need to have another company like CyberSheath or another managed service provider to help them with this? They should know what this is. And again, it gets back to navigating through the framework, and that sometimes it's in your best interest to have somebody who's a subject matter expert taking a look at your processes and procedures. It's kind of like thinking like lawyers hire other lawyers, right? If I'm involved in a lawsuit, I might bring on some of the lawyers who are experts in this area. And so, IT companies like Veritas Technology hire other IT companies in order to maintain their compliance because it just makes sense. And it gets back to the reasons for that. It's the firm fixed pricing, that you know what you're getting into. It provides a level of predictability in terms of costs and requirements. And so there's all kinds of advantages to doing that and using that as part of your business model and your strategy for remaining competitive. Another important thing to understand in terms of a case study is that the CMMC requirements apply both to smaller businesses as well as large. It applies equally across the board. And so when ESP&P worked out a product with BAE to provide a service to the federal government, they're like an environmental cleanup company. And the majority of their clients were not from the DoD, but they still have to maintain the compliance for cybersecurity. So even small businesses can leverage a large portfolio of that a company like CyberSheath would bring to the table in order to maintain their compliance. And again, the reasons apply the same, whether you're small or large. It's the predictability, it's the managed service provider, scalability. All those same reasons apply no matter where you're at. So I think we'll probably wrap things up here. And the important thing to take away, I think, is that defense industrial base companies have got to face reality. And that reality is that the data and information generated by their work, the processes that they use, is equally of value and probably more valuable, especially to an adversary, than the product itself or service that they're providing. And it's a new reality of the information age. This is kind of where we're at, and this is the environment that we find ourselves in. So I guess, when you take a look at it, questions like, do you have an adequate security system security plans in place? Do you have a POAM that outlines shortfalls, and then how you're going to address those, and how you're going to move that ball across the line? And then implementation control measures, how they're at. I think the important thing to understand is that the CMMC is not just a one-shot deal. You fire around, it's done, we've serviced that target, we move on to the next one. You have to maintain compliance as well as just doing your audits and doing the normal scope of duties and responsibilities with CMMC. So it's an ongoing, continuous process. It's not a one and done scenario that you're going to find yourself in. And the managed service provider content market is crowded and it's competitive. And so, if in a market like that, it's important to understand that experience counts. And I think CyberSheath really kind of stands out because they were there. Their CEO Eric Noonan was there from the beginning and helped draft some of the initial DFARS clauses back in 2013. And he's been actively playing a role, and the company's actively been playing a role in a community of interest as it relates to CMMC. So, I mean, all of these things, all these factors kind of come into play, and it's something that I think defense industrial-based companies need to consider when they're looking for somebody, a partner they can work with to help them maintain their compliance. By the numbers, CyberSheath has over 6 successful in-depth audits of their services. They have over 600 NIST 800-171 assessments and implementations. They've got 9 years of experience in terms of influencing customers. And, not only that, but it's a veteran-owned business as well. And I think like veterans like myself and many others, we're naturally inclined to work within the cybersecurity environment. We always consider security as essential to conducting your business of your organization. So, we're still continuing to defend our country, even though we're not wearing a uniform anymore. And so, we like to do this. And I just would really like to thank the team at CyberSheath for bringing me over and letting me share some of my experience and let me talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done, not just for CyberSheath, but also for Frost & Sullivan. And so with that, I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, Robert. And driving home that very important message, the value of the data your company holds, produces, and processes can be more valuable than the actual product or service you provide to the DoD.